DeForest Kelley was a dramatic actor, not a comedian, and he was just one of several performers who stood their ground and deviated from the screenplay. 2012's The Avengers solidified the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a force to be reckoned with. It united multiple iconic superheroes, but there's no question that its biggest star was Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, as he got the biggest scenes and the best lines. One of them comes right at the end of the film, as Tony Stark asks his teammates if they've ever had a certain Middle Eastern street food.
You ever tried shawarma? There's a shawarma joint about 2 blocks from here. I don't know what it is, but I want to try it.
But that line is only there because Downey hated what he was originally supposed to say. Famously rewritten by Joss Whedon in place of an earlier draft by Zach Penn, the script had Tony asking the rest of the Avengers, what's next? But Downey insisted that the moment called for something a bit more lively, clever, and fun. Whedon agreed and jotted down pages and pages worth of alternate lines. But Downey still wasn't happy, so he ultimately opted for something wholly of his own creation. The shawarma ad-lib led to the filming of an entirely new scene that was tacked on at the end of the credits, and it's since become one of the film's signature moments. Tessa Thompson delivered a string of noteworthy performances in the 2010s that led to her eventually encountering some intergalactic travelers, as she played M alongside Chris Hemsworth Agent H in 2019's Men in Black International. Even though she already had some experience in blockbuster franchises, Thompson had at least one line she wouldn't cross. In particular, she refused to say one bit of dialogue that came off as blatant nostalgia. During an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she was asked if she would ever utter Will Smith's famous line from the original Men in Black.
I make this look good.
But as Thompson made clear, I wouldn't have said it. In fact, I think someone did ask me to, just as an option, and I said no. M is just different from that character. Yeah, I was really conscious of too much nostalgia. Nevertheless, Thompson did accept that callbacks were part of the game, as she admitted. Inside of that, there were moments when I thought, let's lean in. Pretty much every Star Wars fan knows the legend by now. While filming one of the most important scenes in The Empire Strikes Back, Harrison Ford's Han Solo was originally supposed to say, I love you too, in response to Princess Leia's I love you. But instead he famously uttered, I know. The moment effortlessly shows just how cool Han Solo is, while melting the hearts of everyone who wishes they were Princess Leia. And it's all thanks to Ford coming up with it right there on the spot. But what some movie buffs may not know is that there was an entirely separate line written for Han as he passed by Leia on his way to be frozen in carbonite. The scene was going to begin with Leia telling Han, I love you. I couldn't tell you before, but it's true. Then Han was supposed to look her way, pause, and respond sternly, just remember that, because I'll be back. But during filming, director Irvin Kershner agreed with Ford that the dialogue was a bit too much, so Ford rewrote the scene on the spot, coming up with new lines for both characters, and the result was one of the most iconic exchanges in the franchise. With 3 Oscar wins and 21 nominations as of 2024, Meryl Streep may very well be one of the most talented women to ever grace the big screen. With all the accolades she's received over the years, people tend to listen to what she has to say. So when she didn't like a certain line in 2006's The Devil Wears Prada, there wasn't much discussion about what to do. The moment came during the table read, as Streep had a problem with what eventually became one of the film's famous lines. While her character, fashion magazine editor Miranda Priestley, sits in a car with her assistant Andy, she was supposed to have said, everybody wants to be me. But Streep suggested a simple one-word alteration, rendering the final version a little bit more modest.
Everybody wants to be us.
1973's The Way We Were is one of the most beloved romantic dramas of all time. Barbra Streisand and Robert Redford came together to tell the story of a Jewish anti-war activist who falls in love with Redford's politically disinterested Wasp. Things eventually get hot and heavy between the two leads, and there's one scene that originally included a line in the script that Redford simply wouldn't utter. Specifically, he refused to tell Streisand's character it'll be better this time, as he receives to go for another round in bed. As Robert Halfler wrote in his book, The Way They Were, how epic battles and bruised egos brought a classic Hollywood love story to the screen, Redford had remarked that he was never bad in bed, so there was no way his character would be. The obvious implication is that he feared that the line would damage his reputation as a virile man whom the ladies adored. After the lackluster response to Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979, 1982's Wrath of Khan pretty much saved the franchise. It delivered action, adventure, and one heartbreaking moment that shook fans to their core: the death of Mr. Spock. Spock's sacrifice to save the Enterprise is one of the most heartbreaking deaths in movie history, thanks in part to the gut-wrenching reaction of Captain Kirk.
He's dead already.
But Scotty's line only exists because DeForest Kelley, who played Dr. McCoy, refused to say what was scripted. He was reportedly supposed to have told Kirk, "He's dead, Jim," the character's iconic catchphrase. It might seem like a strange refusal since Kelley said it so many times before, but there was some logic to the decision. Kelley reportedly worried that the line had become overused and that it might elicit unintended laughter during what was supposed to be the film's most powerful scene. McCoy does get his own emotional line in the final cut though, as he warns Kirk not to enter the engine chamber to help his best friend.
You'll flood the whole compartment.
Christopher Lee has had plenty of famous roles in his decades-long career, including one of the greatest villains of all time, Count Dracula. The 1958 version of Dracula features one of Lee's finest performances, as he's able to strike fear into anyone's heart with just a simple fierce glare. Famous for his silence, this version of Dracula wasn't always supposed to be so mum though, as Lee himself explained in an interview with Classic Monsters. People all over the world who have seen that film have asked me why I didn't speak in it. The answer is very simple. I'd read the scripts and the lines were literally unsayable. Lee was clearly trying to evoke the feeling of Bram Stoker's original Dracula novel, and he felt that the lines he was given weren't faithful to the source material. As he recalled, "This was a great fight I used to have over the years with Hammer. I kept on saying, why don't you use Stoker's words?" And obviously frustrated Lee was blunt with producers, as he simply insisted, "I'm sorry, I'm not saying these lines." The Wrath of Khan wasn't the only time a Star Trek actor refused to deliver a line of dialogue that just wasn't working. But in the case of 1991 Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, Nichelle Nichols had a somewhat different concern than DeForest Kelley. While entertaining a group of Klingons for a state dinner, the Enterprise crew is nervous and several officers display subtle bias against them. Lieutenant Uhura was supposed to do the same thing, but Nichols balked at a line meant to demonstrate that humans still had some prejudice to overcome in the 22nd century. William Shatner recalled in his book, Star Trek Movie Memories, Uhura, as originally scripted, would have made reference to the kinder, gentler Klingons by saying something to the effect of, "Yeah, but would you want your daughter to marry one?" But Nichols refused to say it, likely because of its obvious parallels to American racism amidst the 1960s civil rights movement, when interracial marriage was cause for concern.
Did you see the way they ate?
Crispin Glover is best known as George McFly in Back to the Future, and he famously sued Universal Studios when they used his likeness in the first sequel. Since then, he's had a bit of a prickly reputation, and one of the most famous examples of that happened on the set of Charlie's Angels, the 2000 big screen reboot of the 70s TV show. In the film, Glover played a creepy, lanky assassin known only as the Thin Man. But in the studio's first meeting with the actor, he made it crystal clear that he hated the lines that he was given in the script and wouldn't sign on unless he could make a huge change. As he recalled to The Guardian, the dialogue was just expositional. But instead of writing new lines to say, Glover had a radical idea. His character would be entirely mute. Perhaps unexpectedly, director McG quickly got behind the idea, and Glover performed the whole part without uttering a single word. In the 1930s, there weren't many famous black actors, and even fewer of them were women. But if there was one black performer whom audiences knew, it was Hattie McDaniel, a trailblazing actor who starred in hundreds of films. In 1940, she became the first black actor to win an Academy Award for her performance as a house servant Mammy in 1939's Gone with the Wind, an epic romance set amidst the American Civil War. Gone with the Wind was very much a product of its time, with subject matter that has proven to be problematic in the decades since. To McDaniel's considerable credit, she refused to play a part that could have been much more controversial if she hadn't spoken up. As it turned out, the script didn't just call for black characters to defend slavery. It also contained multiple uses of some of the worst racial slurs. Producers argued that such language brought authenticity and that it wouldn't be a problem as long as the dialogue was spoken by so-called better black characters. But McDaniel wasn't having it, and ultimately she was reportedly able to convince the filmmakers to ditch many of the slurs.
It ain't fitting, it just ain't fitting. Ain't fitting.
James Cagney was often typecast as a gangster or a tough guy throughout his career, but that wasn't yet the case when he filmed Sinner's Holiday in 1930. That's because the film was his big screen debut, as he'd played one of two brothers whose mother's boardwalk arcade is a front for a bootlegging operation during Prohibition. Though it was his first movie, Cagney wasn't afraid to speak up to director John G. Adolphi when he was called upon to deliver a line that he absolutely despised. As Cagney once explained, "There was a line in the show where I was supposed to be crying on my mother's breast. Warner Brothers executive Daryl Zanuck had written the line, and I was expected to say it. It was, 'I'm your baby, ain't I?' I refused to say it." Adolphi said, "Well, I'm gonna tell Zanuck." Even in the face of threats that could jeopardize his career, Cagney simply wouldn't do it. So he held his ground, the line was removed, and he went on to become one of the biggest movie stars of his generation.